Hello everyone. I hope you're doing well. I am Vandana Moture, your host for this episode of the podcast series brought to you by Industry Inspire Talks. I welcome you all to our channel. Talking about podcast series, it is a series where we invite people from the industry to share their industry experiences with us. Our guest for today is Mr. Pablo Veramendi. Here's a little bio about Pablo. Pablo is a director of audience evangelist at Microsoft who has spent the past 20 years leveraging technology to empower others to achieve more. For the past 6 years, he has been leading Microsoft's Global Imagine Cup, student technology competition where competitors bring their dreams to life and compete on a world stage. Over the past 2 years, he has also taken on the Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador program, which consists of on campus leaders with a passion for making a difference, building vibrant communities, and sharing the latest tech with their peers. He truly believes that the future is in the hands of these incredibly talented students, and is honored and humbled to work at Microsoft to give all the students the opportunities to share and shine. The interview consists of two parts. Part 1 is about Mr. Pablo's inspiring career journey, starting as a system administrator to a technology manager and now a director. Part 2 consists more about the Microsoft trends in 2021, typical workday, how it looks like in a Microsoft environment, and final career tips from Mr. Pablo. So make sure that you attend both of the two parts, and we are absolutely positive that it will definitely help you in your career. So, without any further ado, let's get into the Inspire career journey of Mr. Pablo Veramendi. All right, here we are. So, welcome to the show, Mr. Pablo. How are you
Thank
doing
you.
today?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. Very excited to be here and speaking with you.
It's a pleasure to have you with us, and we're really looking forward to learn a lot from your journey.
I look forward to telling you about it.
All right, so let's get started. To begin with, how about you walk us through your career journey when you started to where you are right now?
So my career journey is very different. I actually started at a very young age. I've always been interested in computers, mostly when I was a kid because I wanted to play computer games. So it was all about, my mom was an author, so she had a computer at home, and I was like, I want to play games on this computer. What can I do to do that? And so very much self-taught. This was before the internet, at the internet age. I'm dating myself here. But really, the moment that I knew that I wanted to have a career in technology was when my mom was she was taking her manuscripts to FedEx or UPS to ship to the publisher. And she was always very rushed, and she was running, and she was at last minute, and this huge stack of papers, and she was always very stressed. And I said, well, why don't you just send it via the computer? And she's like, well, I don't know how to do that, and I don't know if they know how to do that. I'm like, well, I can show them. That's not a problem. And she's like, well, okay, well, if you think you can show them, then sure, let me get them on the phone with you. So a few days later, she got them on the phone, and she said, okay, I'm gonna put you on with my son. He wants to help us, send the file digitally over the computer. And so they handed the phone over, and I don't think they were expecting a 12-year-old boy to be explaining to them how to do it. And so this is before the internet again, before email. So this was using a modem that used the phone lines to essentially transfer data digitally. And so my first question to them was, are you using Windows? And so when they said yes, I knew, because I use Windows at home, I knew that their experience was the same as mine. So I kind of stepped them through, click here and double click on that. And here's the command line that you need to put in so you can accept my call when I call via my modem. And so it took maybe 10 minutes, and we transferred this file. And they just couldn't believe it. Because
I cannot believe it either right now.
Well, beyond the fact that it was a 12-year-old, they couldn't believe that it was so easy to send a file over a computer, and that essentially they were taking manuscripts that my mom was printing on a printer, and then they had to accept them and scan them in. I don't even know what they did with them, but now they actually had a digital copy of the file. It was completely transformed the way that they did business. And so they were totally blown away, and they were very grateful. They, in fact, later on asked my mom for a picture so they could hang up in their lounge of me.
That's adorable.
But then
the guy who transformed our work.
And a couple of days later, and this is Houghton Mifflin. This is a big publisher. This is not like, a small, this is one of the biggest publishing houses in the US. And so a couple of days later, they called my mom and she said, well, what do you think of my manuscript? And I'm like, actually, we wanted to talk to your son. And she's like, what? And she's like, they asked if I could help another author do the same thing. So I ended up doing this with 2 or 3 different authors. And then I'm like, you know what? I need to write these steps down. And so at 12, I had my first experience of documentation, essentially writing down the instructions so that they could share it with other authors. And I realized the impact of technology at that point. I had been using it to have fun, to play games, but it felt good to know that I made a difference. It felt good to know that I was changing the way that they were doing business. And obviously I was 12, so I wasn't really thinking in necessarily in that mindset, but it stuck with me, right? It stuck with me like, hey, I know something about computers. I can help empower others with my knowledge and hopefully, let them do things more efficiently and better. And so that was kind of the beginning. I ended up being known as the computer guy in the neighborhood. So all the neighbors, if they had computer problems, would ask me to come over and I would fix them. And they're all like, oh my God, what would we do without you? And then when I graduated from high school, the day of my graduation, literally, actually it was the next day, it was the day after my graduation, my neighbor called and she said, hey, we have the president of this company over and he says he can't find any good people that can help with computers and he wants to talk to you. I'm like, all right. So I ran over and kind of had an impromptu interview with him and he said, come talk to our systems admin next week. We'd love to, get you on board and get you to help out. And so I went there the following week. And so now I was 17, I guess. I was 17 years old. And I had long hair at the time. I was hair in a ponytail and, and so I went over and I spoke to the systems administrator and he just asked me a bunch of questions and I told him and, again, explained to him that I love technology. I love how it makes things easier. It can empower other people. And so they offered me the job on the spot to essentially be the assistant to this network administrator. But little did anybody know that he was actually planning on leaving. And I was going to college in the same town. But so he left and I had already started school and I was working part-time. And instead of hiring somebody new, they're like, let's see what this 18-year-old can do for us. So I ended up being the network administrator for a startup, actually, at the time, for a year and a half, I think, while going to school full time. I felt like I was having more fun and learning more at work than I was at school. And so, unfortunately, my grades didn't do so well, and I kind of had to take a break and figure out what is it that I really want to do. I mean, I could have continued working, but I also wanted to have a degree, right? I mean, it was important for me to have a degree. So anyway, ended up deciding to take some time off from school and kind of focus on a technology career. So I ended up being a systems admin for another company called Omron Healthcare. They do like electronic medical equipment. So I managed all the infrastructure, the servers, the backup systems, all the desktops, the PCs. And this was in '99. And so the Y2K bug, that was a big deal. I was a part of the company. I had to make sure, figure out which systems needed to be updated in time so that they wouldn't crash. And I had to show up to work at 8 a.m. on New Year's Day to make sure that nothing died. Everything was still working.
Yeah.
But still, I loved it. I loved, that I was the kind of the go-to person, both personally with my family and friends and community, as well as at work. And, it felt good to know that I was empowering people with technology, right? And so that was kind of always the bug in me, that I just wanted to see, how can I empower more people? And so eventually took a total 180 degree turn. I love cars too. I'm a big car nut. And there was an opportunity to move to Detroit and work in the automotive industry. And as you know, that cars have a lot of computer systems in them. And so they needed somebody that was savvy about networks and computers. And so I'm like, yeah, awesome. Wow. I get to work on cars and computers. Why not? And so I moved to Detroit for, I think it was almost 4 years. And I worked at Roush Industries and I got to do some amazing, crazy things. I got to drive, prototype cars and test track desert.
Well, your smile and your happiness shows it all. You loved it.
Right. No, it was awesome.
But the interesting thing about it was, while it was great, it was fun. I got to do things that, like, I don't know how I was very fortunate and privileged to be able to get that job. But ultimately, it wasn't very satisfying. I mean, it was fun, but like, the cars I was working on were super expensive. Like the Ford GT is a supercar, and they only made, I think, 1,000 of them, and they cost, over $100,000. So very few people could afford them. And so while it was fun, like I was a 20-year-old getting to work on this project, ultimately I didn't really feel like the impact of my work was really having a larger impact, right? It was making a very special thing for special people that could afford it, and not really empowering many people. So I decided that I wanted to get my degree, like finish my degree. So I focused on going back to school part-time while working, and then I went back to school full-time at the university that I started in Northwestern, just in the U.S. in Chicago, just north of Chicago, and decided to finish my degree, and then kind of another 180. Work for a nonprofit, because I knew that I wanted to have an impact. I knew I wanted to empower others, and I felt like a nonprofit would be the best place for me to be able to do that. And so I worked for a nonprofit called Youth Guidance in Chicago, and I managed the entire IT infrastructure, including the cellular phones, and we were a Microsoft shop, so it was Exchange, SharePoint, the Office, all that, SQL Server, and so had now like very deep experience in the entire Microsoft stack. And part of the reason, well, I've always been a Microsoft fan, but B, Microsoft gives software to nonprofits at like almost for free. I mean, you pay a very small fee for the license, but it's almost for free. So we were always on the bleeding edge. We always had the newest versions of the software. It was fun to experiment and play. Like I played with virtualization before, like most Fortune 500 companies were using it, and so it was fun to be able to do that and be in an environment where I could experiment and play with newer technologies before other people could, and all the while knowing that I was empowering our staff to essentially help students. The organization I work for essentially empowered students to graduate from high school and go on to college or to get a job, and so all the work that I was doing was to support the people that were essentially giving these kids a better platform for life. And so I loved it. It was great, very meaningful. It felt like a family. The nonprofit I worked at, they really appreciated the work that I was doing, and I'm also very much about reuse instead of like throwing things away. I want to get as much use out of things as possible. So.
What a role model for the students. Amazing.
Well, thank you. And so, for example, a laptop that broke, I would actually take it apart and fix it. And so I would, because I love Legos. That was the other thing. I think that's kind of the root to everything is Legos for me.
Legos? Okay.
Yeah.
Point taken, kids.
Yeah, I love putting things together and taking them apart and building new things and like, knowing that I could look at instructions, follow instructions, and put a very complex thing together from thousands of different pieces was something that I loved, and then do it differently, right? And then take another approach at it. And so like way back when, like I said, my mom had a computer. I wanted to play computer games. The computer didn't have a sound card, and so I wanted sound in my games, and so I went and bought a sound card, and it had instructions on how to install it. So I took apart this computer. I was probably 11 or 12, maybe it was around the same time that my mom did this, and I'm taking apart a computer, looking inside, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy, what am I doing? But the instructions were very simple. Take this card, you put it in the slot, you screw it in, and so I kind of went back to the Legos, and I go, oh, if I can follow those instructions, I can follow these. And the same with cars, like, I have a project car that I wrench on, and it's kind of the same thing, like it's all parts that you put together, right? They create a whole, they create a machine, but ultimately they're all individual parts. So anyway, sorry, I got off on a major tangent here. So for laptops, so for these laptops, they would break, and we were a nonprofit. We didn't have a whole lot of money, and so buying a new laptop, we had to budget for that. So rather than buy it, I knew that if it was like a crack in the screen, I knew I could go on eBay or find a replacement screen for pretty cheap, and I would just do it myself because, it didn't take a whole lot of time. It saved the nonprofit money, and ultimately had the same result, right? And so the same thing with all the servers that we used, I would as I decommissioned them from like, maybe it was originally our most powerful SQL server, but 4 years later it was underpowered for that. So I would find another way, like to use it as a phone system or to use it for something else or to donate it to another nonprofit that could use it. So I never wanted to throw anything away.
Throw anything, yeah.
And so, and it drove my parents nuts because I would actually, we would drive down the street, and if we saw a computer on the curb, I would take it home because 99% of the time, it was a very simple problem, but it was cheaper for them to go buy a new one than it was to take it to the store and have a professional fix it, right? And so, and then I would take those computers, I would refurbish them, and I would give them to nonprofits so that they could use them in their communities and stuff like that. So yeah, so I loved it. It was amazing working for this nonprofit. I felt very meaningful, but then got more serious about, my personal life. I wanted to get married, wanting to, buy a home for my family. And I had been in this nonprofit for 6 years, and, it was very hard. I was already at the top of the IT chain, right? There was nowhere else for me to go, really. And so to earn more or to do something different, there was just not a whole lot of possibilities. And then this is in 2008, and then the market, we had the big crash in 2008 in the US, and my nonprofit was affected. And so I was furloughed, and I don't know if that essentially means that you're forced to take, we work 3 days instead of 5 days a week, right? And you lose 20% of your pay. And I still had a job, but, my wife also worked for nonprofits. So we're both furloughed at the same time. And at this point, we're like, maybe one of us should work for a for-profit. and this whole time I was building relationships with Microsoft because, again, I was using their nonprofit program. And so they would come speak in Chicago to nonprofits. I would go to those talks and try to make connections there. And so I always Microsoft was always like this unattainable goal that it would be amazing to work there in the future. And actually, I have a funny story about Bill Gates that I'll tell you later. Remind me.
Oh, wow, sure.
It's not impressive, but it's funny. And so it was kind of always this thing. And so when it finally came time to take a serious look at changing careers from nonprofit to for-profit, Microsoft was at the top of my list. And it just happened when I looked at that point in time for a job, they had a job in the public sector. So for nonprofits, for schools, universities, and local governments and education. And so I'm like, hey, you know what? This is a job at Microsoft. It's still within the same kind of wheelhouse. It's still within the same, I still feel like I'm empowering. I still feel like in that role, I would be empowering people that will then empower others that need help, right? And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to go all in. And so I probably spent 2 weeks on my resume, every night, really refining it, getting feedback from friends, other professionals, because maybe I didn't have one chance, but in my head, I was like, this is like the perfect role for me to get into Microsoft. It
mattered to you.
Yeah, and it mattered to me. And it was also, I found it was easier to connect the work I was doing for a nonprofit into this role than it would be other roles at Microsoft, right? And so I'm like, if I want to make the jump, this is probably one of the ideal roles to do that with. And so I wanted to go, 150% in and make sure that I put all of it into it. And so I got my resume to a point where I gave it to this friend that I really trust as kind of my final review. And she looked at it, she's like, Pablo, this resume is perfect. This is the best resume I've ever seen.
Wow.
And I'm like, sweet, okay, I'm ready. And so I sent it in, and they asked me to come interview, and I got the call for the interview, and I was obviously very excited. And they gave me the date, and I just didn't know what to expect. But 48 hours before the interview, they sent me an email with a 48 slide PowerPoint. They said, okay, for your interview, we're going to role play that you already got the job, and we're going to pretend we're your customer, and you have to present this. You have to present us this deck, and that's all they said. I'm like, what? I've never been a Microsoft employee. So the role was technical account manager. So I essentially managed support contracts, or I was going to manage support contracts for this. I think they played state government or something for the role play. And the only thing that I could change was one slide that was about me, right? And so all the rest, I couldn't touch any of the other slides in the deck, but I could present. And they said, so in this role play, you are replacing another technical account manager, and this is your first meeting with the customer.
Okay.
And so I'm like, okay, so it's important that that slide is the only thing I can change. And they said I only had 5 minutes on that slide that I could spend on that slide for the interview. And so obviously that was the most important thing. So in 48 hours, I had to figure out what am I going to put on that slide. And so the first thing I did was, what are my top achievements that I've accomplished in technology, right? So I put those all in there, and I'm like, okay, I'm looking at it, I'm tweaking it a little bit. I'm like, this is on my resume. All this stuff is on my resume. Like they're going to see this already, right? Like I need something that they'll like remember me by, like that differentiates me from other people. Everybody else is, putting their resume on this slide too, right? So what can I do differently? And so I'm like, how can I show them like who I am and what I'm passionate about, and show them what I want to do for them as their technical account manager. And so it occurred to me, so I mentioned this project car that I have. I'm not going to get too deep into the story, but essentially I did a lot of work on it. I swapped the motor and the transmission and all this stuff. And so the day that I got it to start for the first time after working on it for a year, I had like the biggest smile on my face you could possibly imagine. And I was dirty. I had grease on my hands, my arms, my face. I was wearing, overalls, which you wear when you work on cars. But I was happy because I got this thing to work, right? This thing that I've been working on for so long. And so that was my slide was that picture of me. Just
wow.
That's it. I had no text on it. That was it. So I get to the slide.
Awesome.
I get to the slide, and then all it was just telling them that story, telling them like, this is me in my element. This is me working on something that I love. It's getting under the hood, making it more powerful, more efficient. Making it everything that I want it to be. And that's what I want to do with you as my customer. I want to look under your hood. I want to see how your infrastructure works. I want to see how I can make you more efficient, how I can make you more powerful. And then I went into the story I just told you, that from, it all started when I was a kid, of empowering people and then using technology to do that, and all the different steps that I took. So this entire story, every part of this journey was part of this 5 minutes that I had during this interview. And so, but that was it. There was no text on the slide, and it was just that slide of me behind the whole time. And it really had an impact. They came up to me afterwards and told me, like, I had two of the people I interviewed saying that was one of the best interviews they've had. And
absolutely. So impactful.
And let me rewind a little bit. That 5 minutes, I probably spent at least 4 hours rehearsing it.
Okay.
Just like, preparing what is the exact script that I want to say, wow. Telling it to my wife, making sure that I spoke slowly and they could understand, because I tend to speak very fast, as I'm realizing now that I'm doing that during this podcast. And so like just really rehearse. You get the chance to interview the company of your dreams. Like, you need to focus all of your energy on that. Like, you don't just think that you can just wing it and get it, right? I come from a very privileged place. I realize that, I understand that, but still, like, I don't go into any interview assuming that I'm going to get the job. Mm-hmm. You have to sell yourself. You have to make them want you, and you have to spend the time that it takes to do that, right? And so again, probably rehearsed it for 4 hours. And so wow. And so when I got there, it came out naturally, and I hit all the points I wanted to hit on, and so to me that was very important, and it got me into Microsoft, and didn't get me this job, but obviously it was part of the journey into getting this role. And so I think that's in the two things that I think were the most important about that is, one, really dedicating time to your resume. There's so many people that just send the same resume out to every role, and every role is different. And if you send the exact same resume with the exact same goals and everything, like, the result's going to be the same, right? They need to know why you're perfect for that job, not just any job, but that job, right? And the same for the interview. Like, every interview is going to be different with every company, with every role. And so don't just assume that you can just say the same things. Like, really think about what are you passionate about in that role? What can you bring to that specific role, and be ready for the questions for that role. I spent a lot of time researching the role itself, anything I could find in public facing. What is a TAM? What do they do? The other thing that I did was on the slideshow, on the deck that I had to present. One of the things was talking about the new version of SharePoint, right? And so I actually printed out the white paper on the new version of SharePoint and handed it out during the meeting, right?
Wow.
It was a role play. Like, they all work for Microsoft, but I wanted them to see, like,
with my customers, I'm going to come prepared. I'm going to bring this thing. And one of the guys
That's
told me,
next level. That's amazing.
yeah, one of the guys told me, he's like, nobody's ever handed out like a one pager at these meetings, right? And so it was really interesting. And again, it's, you got to think outside the box. You got to think about what will stick with them, what will make them want you to work for them, right? So yeah, and then they,
that's
it was
incredible.
Funny. Immediately after that interview, the hiring manager came to me and he took me aside and he said, so, because one of the other hiring managers had to leave early, so he wasn't in that meeting. So he took me aside after the interview. He's like, hey, we want you to talk to the other hiring manager as soon as possible. So I figured that was probably a good sign. And then they offered me the job the next day. So
wow, that's amazing. And I'm sorry about that.
No worries. I have 2 little ones. So
okay, there you go. But what an incredible journey. I mean, the best part about your journey is you have always been really curious, extremely creative, and you've put in the work right from the start. When you were 12-year-old, I mean, what stood out was your maturity to ask the right questions to people. Because as they say, the quality of your questions is going to deliver the quality of your work or your life, for that matter.
Absolutely.
So asking the right questions, having that maturity, always putting in the work, because you've learned from your experience, not just by studying. Studying and learning, there's a difference. So you actually getting the experience by doing things. What I really loved about what you shared is you were always prepared. You didn't take things for granted. No matter how much work you'd already put in, you already knew a lot. You loved technology. It was your passion, but still you gave attention to detail. You showed up like it really matters to you, and you put in the work. That's so inspiring. I'm sure all of our viewers are taking in a lot of inspiration from your story right now. So thank you so much for sharing that.
No problem. It's again, I think it's important that folks understand that, as now I'm a manager at Microsoft, and I'm hiring the first folks on my team, and that's what I'm looking for, right? I want to know how will that person have an impact on my team, right? How will they hit the ground running? How will they, why is it that they want this job? Why is it they want to work for Microsoft, right? Sometimes it's just like, I did some worked at a hackathon a couple years ago for Microsoft, and one of the students, we did mock interviews, right? And so I asked one of the students why they wanted to work for Microsoft. Like, oh, it's a big company, you can make a lot of money. And yeah, that's true, but there's a lot of other big companies where you can make a lot of money, and it did not show me that they wanted to work for Microsoft because of what Microsoft is doing as a company. It just showed me that they wanted to make money, right? And that, to me, I would not pick that candidate over somebody who said, I want to work at Microsoft because they invest in nonprofits, or they have this goal to reduce carbon emissions to be a negative carbon emitter by 2025 or whatever. Like that kind of stuff, knowing what the company is doing, not just making money, but what they're doing to make the world a better place. That to me is important to know that that's the reason why they want this to work for this company, right? And so and that's when I interviewed, that was also I made it clear that it was very important to me, having worked in a nonprofit, having been on the other side of the table, knowing that Microsoft is supporting nonprofits, that they're giving their software, almost giving it away so that nonprofits can empower other people, right? So it was funny because all this kind of gets back to our mission statement of empowering everybody on the planet to achieve more. And I feel like that's kind of been my mission this whole time, even though I didn't, and then when I saw our new mission statement, I'm like, yeah, well, that makes sense that I'm
Absolutely. Here. No, thank you again for enforcing that, because most people don't really know what they want. Knowing what it is for you, why it matters to you, and what are you really passionate about, and then aligning it to that role. And that comes through, when you go for the interviews, that comes through. That
Absolutely.
What is in it for you, and how you're bringing in all your values, because it's not just about the information you have or the education you have. It's also about what attitude and mindset and values you bring along together. So thank you again. Yeah.
No problem.
All right. So thank you for sharing your journey. And you did mention that you faced certain challenges all the way here. What would those challenges be like?
I mean, I think it's ultimately just not being sure, and just having uncertainty, and definitely imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome, I don't know if your watchers or viewers are familiar with it, but it's essentially where
you feel like an imposter, that like you shouldn't be there and that you don't deserve to be in that position or in that role or to be even considered for it.
Pretending to be someone else.
Yeah. And so I think all that's tough, and being afraid to fail too. Right. And so, well, for example, when I left school for 6 years, I started 2 years of college, or 2.5, and I left for 6. And yes, I learned a lot, and I'm glad that I had that experience. I worked that whole time, and so I got a lot of work experience. But it was important to go back, and I was really afraid to go back because I felt like I kind of already failed because I had left. And so, but everybody's journey is different. Like some people take a year after high school before they go to college. Some take multiple. Some don't go to college. Some don't finish college, right? And so, all that's okay. It's all up. But you need to have a clear path to what you want to achieve, right? If you don't feel you have that, like then you're spinning your wheels. You got to rethink things, right? Is it going back to school? Is it finding kind of that first step? Maybe it's not the ideal job, but it's the first one that can get you to that next job, right? The technical account manager role at Microsoft was not my ideal job. I mean, was not what I wanted to do. But because it was in public sector, I had a connection to it. So I found that connection. And because Microsoft as a company does so much to empower others and to make the world, a better place, I felt like even if it wasn't the exact job that I wanted, being part of a company that's doing such great things was important to me, right? So, I mean, so many people start like, as flipping hamburgers at McDonald's, and they end up becoming like, CVP, right? So you never know, but you need to take that first step. Like, you don't just spin your wheels, right? You got to figure out what is it and talk to people. If you don't know, I mean, that's the thing. Like I was really challenged by going back to school, and after 6 years of not being in school, and is this the right thing? Am I wasting my money? I already have a successful career. Why spend more money on university, especially in the US? It's so expensive. But I talked to my brother, as a mentor of mine, and he helped me think through it. I talked to other adults that were mentors of mine that kind of helped me think through it and realize, like, if the long-term goal is to have a successful career at a big company, a degree is important. It's not the only thing, right? It's not the only thing that defines you, but it is important. And so, and ultimately, like, I hope to get my MBA at some point in the future. When I have time, we'll see. And so you need to have an undergrad degree to get that, right? And so to get a master's. And so, I knew that was another step I wanted to take. And, you just have to think there's always, achievable ways of doing it. If one of the things that I thought about going back to school was, if I don't want to go back to Northwestern, which is very expensive, I could go back to a trade school or go back to a community college and just get that degree without spending all that money. I found a way to do it, getting loans and whatnot, but there's always that incremental step that you can take, and it's figuring out what that is for you and what that right step is for you to achieve what it is that you want to do next. You're not going to I was very fortunate and very privileged to make a jump from nonprofit to Microsoft, but it is all that experience that I had before then that I built up that allowed me to do that, including going back to school, right? And so if I didn't have that story of I wouldn't have been able to get that role, right? And so everything you've done is important, and it's part of who you are, and it can be part of that story when you interview or when you're working on your resume, and just you need to own that, and you need to bring your whole self to these opportunities, and just know. I know it's I'm telling you, even today, even now that I'm working at Microsoft, I definitely have imposter syndrome and thinking like, what is that next step? Like, what do I want to do 3 to 4 years? And it may seem unachievable to be a GM right now, a general manager, but if it's something that I want to do, like what are those incremental steps? And those are achievable, right? And making sure that I go in with the mindset, like these little steps I can take are achievable, and they will help me in that path. And, hopefully someday I get that opportunity.
Thank you. What an incredible, many incredible points in that share. That having that faith, in fact, asking yourself that question, what is it that I want for myself going forward? As you said, most of us don't. We just keep doing what we're doing. We don't have that, that curiosity to know what do I want in 4 years from now? And I need to start putting in the work now to be able to achieve that, no matter how distant it feels. And am I aligned, or do I need to change something? Having that maturity, or probably the emotional intelligence to be connected to self. And what you mentioned about the school, going back to university, what mattered really was what you did in that break.
Right.
You decided to take a break, but it wasn't random. It was because there's something that you thought about and you did put in the work again. It wasn't that you were not doing anything. Because for a lot of people, taking break might be, taking time off.
Yeah.
Or maybe just
playing computer games or
like enjoying their time. I've been stressed, I want to take a break. I mean, we need to take care of our mental health as well. But being able to showcase what you did when you took a break. It's not the break that affects it. What were you able to do in that break? And again, even from your Microsoft interview presentation story, what you mentioned, where you spoke about your story. So winding it up in a story which applies to the role is the key. Everything that you've done, everything that we've done in our life, if we can back it in a way which makes sense for the role, that's what is.
Yeah, and I mean, we all have a story. We all have a story, and it's all different, and it all makes us who we are. And I think we all have to own it and bring that full story, that your full self. And what I love about Microsoft, even I started almost 9 years ago now. It's crazy at Microsoft, and it's changed a lot. It's changed. I mean, since Satya has been the CEO, there's been a lot of change. And one of the things that I love most about it is that they really are encouraging people to bring their whole selves to work, and encouraging managers to hire the person as a whole self, and not because they're great at this one little thing. Like, we want them to be great for Microsoft as a company. Yes, they're good at programming, they're good at being a program manager or whatever, but are they a good fit for the company? Are they wanting to have an impact? Are they wanting to empower others? And that's actually, for me, almost more important than whether or not they can check the boxes of the different specific requirements. Is like, will they be a good fit for the company? Will they bring their whole selves? Because that's what we need. We need diversity in thought. We need diversity in experiences to make products that everybody will want to use, right? And without that, you end up with a product that is good for 10% of the people in the world, and it ends up failing, right? So it's been amazing to see the transformation over the 9 years, and now as a director, hoping that I can be a part of influencing it, right? I just became director a couple months ago, so I'm working on that, but but looking forward to seeing what role I can play in helping the company kind of move in that direction.
What I love what you just shared. A lot of people, as you mentioned earlier as well, that you just apply for the interview or for the jobs, but doing that research, spending time on really learning about the company that you're applying for. What do they believe in? What are they trying to achieve as a company as a whole? What's their mission statement? What's their vision? And only applying if that applies to, somewhere your life purpose or your life mission, because that's when you can stay, there'll be a long-term relationship with it. Yeah. Because if there's a values mismatch, no matter how much you enjoy the work, it might not be as fulfilling for you. So that's a lovely share, and congratulations on your new position as a director.
Thank you. All right. It's an investment. I mean, every employee is an investment for the company, and it's a huge investment, because you're bringing somebody on, you're teaching them the ways, there's all kinds of other stuff, and so we want that investment to work out for us and for that person, right? And so they stay for the long haul, because if they leave after 2 years, all the investment of getting them up to speed and is gone, and then we have to do the same thing with the person that replaces them, right? So it's really important that person be invested in the company as well, and what we're doing, what our mission is, and helping bring that forward.
Absolutely, thank you. All right, so let's move on to the next section of our interview. Now
that brings us to the end of part 1. If you learned something new, if you enjoyed watching part 1, and if you're feeling really inspired, then please hit the like button. Also subscribe to our channel for more such interviews from the guests who have had real industry experience and are there to share their inspiring stories with you all. Now here's an update on part 2. It will be available on our channel on Friday, that is 29th of January. Make sure to check it out to gain some more learnings from the inspiring journey of Mr. Pablo. Thank you for your engagement and participation. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep inspiring others. Wishing you all the very best for your industry career ahead. Thank you.